Thank you very much, Joe. I really enjoyed that talk. It was really it's really inspiring, actually. Um, One of the things that I picked up from that is I really get the impression that you have a dialogue with your students, and I don't just mean that you walk into the classroom and you ask them questions rather than lecturing. I mean that all the way through you have a dialogue with your students. You're listening to them and changing what you're doing in response to them. So almost you're inviting them to become partners as opposed to customers, for want of a better word.
So one of the things that always strikes me as interesting is how many faculty find students to be annoying. They'll come in and they'll talk about the students just annoy me to death. They won't do this, they won't do that, they won't do this. And over the years, I have worked very hard on finding the students amusing. I always tell people I teach puppies and kittens, and I don't believe I teach dogs and cats. I teach puppies and kittens. Now, I teach 20-year-olds, so that gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. And so I'm always interested in them. It's like they always have something fun to tell me. Over 53 years, I have had students come to me and tell me things that would just shock people. It's like, oh my God, you're actually telling me this. But part of it is, I just like being around the kids and talking to them, and they amuse me. But one piece of advice is always get away from being annoyed by the students. They're just students. I think we sometimes think that they ought to be, our equals, and they ought to be discussing higher things. Oh no, come in, we'll talk about all kinds of. You want to talk about Taylor Swift? I can talk about Taylor Swift. And heck, most of the stuff we teach them, it's just philosophy or it's just science. It's not the end of the world if they don't learn the stuff.
Harry.
I've been thinking a lot about a challenge I'm going to have next fall, which is for the first time in about 24 years, I think I'll have a section of the intro financial accounting class. With an intro financial accounting, you've got some kids who really need to be majors, some kids who probably aren't ready for college at all, and everyone in between. Just ask, you got any overarching recommendation to think about? Do you teach the first course?
First off, I'm teaching intermediate 1 this semester. I usually teach intermediate 2. That's my course. I'm in, and you've probably heard me talk about deferred taxes and such. I'm teaching intermediate 1 for the first time since 2008. And I thought to myself, oh, this will be a snap. It's just, it's accounts receivable and it's inventory. I have worked harder on this course. It's amazing how much harder it got over the last 15 years. If you haven't taught it in a while, it's going to be harder than you think it's going to be. I promise you that. Secondly, I teach intro. I'm not teaching it this year, but I teach intro most years. I love intro. Oh God, let me come to your place. I'll teach it for you. And the reason is this: you get such interesting diversity in intermediate 2, which is what I teach. I get I get accounting majors. I mean, these are accounting majors. They want to talk about deferred taxes. In intro, they want to talk about anything and everything. Here's the key: make the puzzles interesting to people who are not going to be accounting majors. When you write those assignments, when you write those puzzles, think about what a music major might want to learn from this course. If you write the right puzzles, and it may take you a while because you've got to kind of get a feel on what is going to catch their attention. It's all in the puzzles, because if you write the right puzzles, who doesn't want to learn stuff if you write the right puzzles? So do a lot of practicing. Think about, don't worry quite so much about debits and credits. Think about what they might need to know. Say, listen, you're going to be a rich doctor after you get out of here. You're going to need to invest all that money in Netflix or Google or Alphabet or whatever. How are you going to need to know where to put that money so you can retire at the age of 50 and go to London and retire or something?
Nadia.
Some of the students that I see, especially maybe in the last few years, I don't know if it's COVID related or whatnot, but I could see that some of my students are absolutely scared to death of making mistakes.
I gave a test. This was an intro course. I gave a test, and the grades ranged from like 55 to 99. Well, you can guess that the student from Afghanistan was the one who made the 99. And I wasn't surprised. This is a brilliant student. He made a 99. He was just a great student. He beat me to my office to argue about that last point. The student who made 55 didn't darken my doorway. The student who made 99 could not deal with the fact it was not 100. And I said, listen, we can discuss this all you want to, but you're wasting your time. This is no big deal. So let me tell you something I've changed. I've come up with a new motto for my class. Students come into accounting because it's numerically based. 3 plus 3 is 6. 4 times 4 is 16. And so they're used to numerical problems having correct answers because they've gone through arithmetic and algebra and so on. And then they come to accounting where it's numerically based, but all we're seeking is a fair presentation. You know, it's fairly presented according to US GAAP or fairly presented according to IFRS. So my new motto is perfection is never the goal. So let's not worry too much about perfection. And I will often miss a question in class, and then I'll write back afterwards and say, oh, in class today I said this, but I really missed the number because I added it wrong. And then I always put in, perfection is never the goal. It's always, as long as it's fairly presented, we're all okay. And I think that kind of attitude where, especially in accounting, that numbers bother those kids because they're just used to numbers being perfect, that to simply go, perfection is never the goal. In fact, I often make them repeat that when we're doing something like estimating bad debts. It'd be a good example. And I go, okay, so you've estimated the bad debts and the net realizable value is $1 million. Are they really going to collect $1 million? And all the students say, no, they're not going to collect $1 million because this is just an estimation. And then I go, well, does that bother you? And they all kind of chant back, no, perfection is not the goal. And I think as long as you kind of stress that perfection is not the goal, you take some of that pressure off of them. But I do think, I don't know if it's the pandemic or the fact that the world seems to be falling apart in some places. They are tightly wound is the term I would use. And so, I try to pay real close attention to my classes to see if anybody is really overly stressed out. Yeah.
The question I had for you, it's kind of connected to Nadia's point as well. There is a kind of sentiment in the air that students, and not just accounting students, might be less resilient than they used to be. You hear that sometimes in conversations with colleagues. I don't know how true it is or how not true it is. I suppose just drawing on your experience, like, do you spot any differences between, an accounting class of 1973 versus an accounting class of 2023? Or is there any big contrast between those two contexts?
Well, I'll give you two answers to that question. I mean, maybe this is just my way of saying I don't know, but I'll give you two answers. Answer one is, I believe that 20-year-old people are always 20-year-old people, whether it's 1914 or 2024, whatever. They want to think about beer, and they want to think about sex, and they want to think about their careers. And I mean, I think that 20-year-old people are just 20-year-old people. I just think that's normal. And so if I take a single student and put them in my office and talk with them for 10 minutes, it could be 1973 in a heartbeat. They're very similar to what they were in 1973. However, I'm very cognizant that suicides are up. I think basically they're the same as always. I think somehow they're more tightly wound. And I think maybe the pandemic did that. Social media. 50 years ago, I would walk into class and I'd have 20 students talking to each other. Now I walk into class and I have 20 students on their phones. And that's just not good for them. And I fuss at them about that. I say, listen, put those phones down. I move my students around all the time because I want them to meet other people and I want them to get to know other people. If you ask anybody anywhere, what's the best part of college? It's the friends you make. but they'll sit there and they'll stare at that phone and not introduce themselves to each other. I don't think that's good for them. And in fact, as a teaching fellow in my building, usually at the beginning of every semester, I will write my faculty and I will tell them, if you see a student who seems like they're have a problem, here's what you're supposed to do at my university. I would strongly urge everybody at every university to know what the system is. If you spot somebody that doesn't look like they're dealing well with the strain, there are professionals who should step in and just to talk to the student and see if there is a problem. I think that's one of our responsibilities. Now, if you're in a class of 200 or 300 people, that may be impossible. But if you're teaching under, let's say, 50 or 60, you get a pretty good feel for what you're seeing.
I'm not teaching, I'm in practice. It applies to a manager as well, not just to a professor. And I've often thought, when you have a bad manager or bad professor, you know exactly what it is that they do that you don't like. But when you have the good ones, you don't always know exactly what it is that makes it good. So, I've written down his 8 points today, but I think the most important thing that you hear from Professor Hoyle's current and former students, and he has a cult following, I assure you, and we're all Facebook friends with him, he's very engaged in the class. He's present and he's there. And, everything he said today, he puts into practice. He teaches to all levels of the class. He never criticized those people who couldn't answer questions, but he also knew for those that needed to be challenged. But, I walked in after junior year and I fell in love at the end of junior year and my grades kind of, went down, and I stopped by to see him to see how I did on my finals. And the first thing he said was, here's what you did, but I know you can do better and you can decide what's important to you and how you, balance your time, but you have higher potential. And so I knew he was engaged, he was paying attention, and he knew all of us, and any of his students will tell you that. So I commend him for the impact that he's had. I think it's important because he's had a huge impact, and you will hear that from his students. That's why I'm here today to listen to him.
Yeah, I feel better about giving you a passing grade now.
Jennifer, that was a wonderful story and testimonial to hear. Thank you so much for sharing that. And actually, of all of the perspectives and opinions that count, that's the one that counts. Accounting Cafe is very often educators talking to other educators, but to hear that from a student is very powerful, and thank you for that heartfelt contribution. Thank you so much, everybody. Please sign up to Accounting Cafe so I can send you a link to the recording and a transcript and other articles and resources as they become available. Please do keep in touch with us. Follow us on LinkedIn, and you've got Joe's details in the chat. Please take those links, copy his email if you want to talk to him. I also put a link up to Joe's blog if you're interested in, if you don't already follow Joe's blog. He's a regular blogger. Of course he is. So thank you very much, everybody. See you again soon, I hope.